Hi, and welcome to Maths Appeal. I'm Bobby Seagull.
And I'm Susan Okereke.
And the aim of our podcast is to make maths accessible to really everyone.
Every week we discuss a fundamental maths topic. This week we're going to be discussing additive reasoning, that's adding and subtracting.
And then I set, I love myself a puzzle related to that topic.
We also have an interview with a wonderful guest called Danielle Newnham. She's the co-founder of F Equals, an empowerment platform for women in tech.
And then, obviously, we need a solution to the puzzle, so we'll discuss that at the end. But first things first, we wanted to say a big thank you to you for taking the time to download our podcast. It's early days for Maths Appeal, and we need to spread the word. So please subscribe, otherwise Susan will be sad. Give us a nice rating and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and we're at Maths Appeal.
Wonderful. So let's get started. Today, the math topic we're looking at is additive reasoning. Additive reasoning is the relationship between adding and subtracting. It's quite a fundamental basic skill in mathematics. And the way we set this topic out is we ask three key questions and we discuss, Bobby and myself as math teachers, how we go about delivering this topic to our students. First question we ask is, what do we first think when we hear about the topic? Second thing we talk about is how do we actually teach the topic? And then we talk about the main issues, the key issues that students find when we deliver it. So to start then, Bobby, when you first thought about the topic additive reasoning, what came to mind?
So I'll be honest, Susan, initially I thought, it's just adding and subtracting, which it is ultimately, but the word reasoning made me feel a bit sort of uncomfortable. So I looked up what sort of people thought additive reasoning meant, and the explanations I had were that children are trying to understand our world of numbers, and it's about addition and subtraction, but it's more than that. It's about like how we join numbers, how we separate numbers, how we look at the parts and wholes. But I guess when someone talks about adding and subtracting, that is what additive reasoning is.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of the relationship and the inverse relationship that adding and subtracting can have. And understanding that, I think a big problem that I've kind of witnessed with students is that they understand the idea of adding, so putting more to something, kind of making something bigger. But when it's the reverse, when it's about taking away, is where they kind of find things a lot harder. So they are able to count on easily, but not able to count backwards easily. And that's kind of, again, quite a massive skill.
Yeah, because growing up, we always count things. Like we will count, 1 car, 2 car, 3 cars. So you're adding upwards. Where subtraction is as a maths teacher, it's like they're both the same level of difficulty, but actually kids find the subtraction part more challenging.
Well, all you have to do is ask a student to count up in twos, and they can easily do that, 2, 4, 6, 8, and they can kind of go to 100 and above. But then when you start to get them to do it backwards, 100, 98, 96, 94, that's where the fluency totally kind of is lost. And that's where actually a lot of difficulty can come, because their counting backwards isn't as kind of secure. But that's kind of, there's the fluency in the words, but it's the fluency in understanding. And additive reasoning is such a key part of what we kind of do, and also something that kind of can get lost, especially in secondary school.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, again, when I heard the word additive reasoning, I thought of verbal reasoning in schools, because again, children, when they write, reading and writing is part of verbal reasoning, but there's there's a slight difference between verbal reasoning and someone that can read and write. And in mathematics, adding and subtracting, how would you distinguish that between additive reasoning?
I think so. The reasoning part, because I did a couple of courses on this last year, and the idea that reasoning is about kind of being able to explain your answer and showing and understanding, whether that's through written or verbally. So it's kind of the student being able to explain that by taking away, they've decreased something, and seeing the relationships there. Something as well is understand. A lot of students, I don't know if you've found this an issue that can kind of arise, is the fact that when the commutative element of adding, and commutative is where, so if I do 3 plus 4 is equal to 7, it's the same as 4 plus 3.
If you just switch it around, it's still the same.
So if you switch the numbers around, it's the same answer. But that isn't the case for subtraction, and that can really confuse a lot of people, especially kids. And that's kind of where I think a lot of confusion can arise with things like negative numbers, but also when it comes to doing, written method subtraction.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of students are very good at written method addition, because you add up and then you kind of carry forward and it kind of makes sense. But when it comes to subtraction, where you've got your numbers, on top of each other in a column, I'll do a visual and you can kind of refer to that on our Instagram page.
Yeah.
When they write it down, the whole concept of borrowing from your place value that's bigger really throws a lot of students. They don't know how to do the written algorithm of subtraction because they don't really understand what's going on. And actually, that's quite massive because it's like counting back and knowing that the borrowing actually is necessary because you're just taking 1 over, and that 1 you're taking is actually a 10. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So again, as a secondary school teacher, I often just assume my students will understand this. Like in year 7, I'll put some questions up and say, let's get you fired up with a quick starter task. Here's some addition, subtraction questions. But then I assume that everyone's developed that concept fully, which is sometimes perhaps a mistake.
Well, because I've worked with a number of students, say, who are like in lower attaining groups, and written subtraction is something that can really, really scupper them. And actually, that's where visuals are really amazing. So there's quite a few resources out there where you can do 51 take away 35 as a column, but you can do it with Dean blocks, so you can sort of see the rods, and you can.
The Dean blocks are the little.
The little, so you've got 1 cube is like 1, and then it's in a rod for 10, and then it's in a square 10 by 10 for 100. And so the whole idea of you borrow from the tens, and that's 1 rod of 10, which means when you take it over for 51, that 1 that's a unit now becomes 11. And so they can visually see that that's happening. I think a lot of the time that wasn't the case. I also think a number line is incredibly powerful. So when I'm teaching adding and subtraction, it's that with the question, say 4 plus 3 equals 7, right? 4, that first number is where you start on your number line. And then the plus tells you whether you go up or down on your number line. And then the 3 tells you by how many steps. And that first number is really important. So again, if I was to say 3 take away 4, you start at 3. Take away, you're going down the number line, and that takes you below 0 to -1. And it's understanding the difference between those two things. So a lot of students might think they're the same, but they're just not.
And a lot of my students, if they see a subtraction question, they always assume that the larger number has to be first. Like when you said 3 minus 4, some of my students in year 7 might have said that's 1. Because they assume you always have to have the larger one at the top, sir.
Yeah. And but you're saying that as year 7. I know some year 11s, who it's a similar thing. So it's the understanding of kind of the order of things as well. Right, so that seems like we are at a good point to get to the puzzle. What you got for us, Bobby?
So I'm rubbing my hands, you can hear that. Okay, so, visual again. So imagine there are 5 women on a basketball team. You can imagine this, on the courts. You can hear the feet rubbing against the...
They're quite tall, are they, Bobby?
They're taller than me, okay? So there's 5 women on a basketball team, and their squad numbers are on their back. So the sum of their squad numbers, which are all different positive integers or whole numbers, this adds up to 50. So what's the largest possible squad number?
Right, okay, so it's 5
So
women.
5 women on a basketball team, each with a different positive whole number on their back, which is their squad number. If the total of their 5 numbers adds up to 50, what is the largest possible individual squad number?
Brilliant. Got it. Okay, right. My mind is thinking. So, on that, we're going to now have a listen to our interview. This week, our guest is Danielle Newnham. She's the writer of books such as Female Innovators at Work, Women on Top of Tech, and she's a co-founder of an empowerment platform for women called F Equals, which also has a great fashion line.
Producer Jenny and Susan met Danielle at the Albright Club in London to find out more about her maths journey and the story behind F Equals.
I'm Danielle Newnham, and I previously worked in tech for 10 years. I worked at a startup which was focused on personalised search, which was a way kind of ahead of its time, and it ran out of funding, and my husband and I, well, my now husband and I and another guy left and set up a mobile apps agency. And while I was working in tech, and particularly working in the apps agency, I saw a real kind of invisibility in terms of women in tech, which really affected me, and I felt like it was not a place that women could thrive if we didn't have female role models. So it became my mission to find these women and shine a light on them. So I did 2 things once I had a kid. I wrote a book about female innovators.
Wow, once you had a child?
Yeah, well, I did it on my maternity leave because I just thought, it's one of those times like motherhood changes you completely. And it became really more important then for me to kind of shine a light on women, because I had a child I was bringing into the world, and I wanted him to see the world as it should be. And then the flip side, the other thing I did was I would go to conferences and be the only woman there, and I could see men wearing their startup tops with the logos on and being able to start conversations because of them. So I decided to set up a company that was an empowerment platform for women. So we interview women from different fields doing amazing work every week, and we also sell fashion with empowering slogans on.
So why did you decide to do this? I mean, I know you said that you didn't see many, but was it because there weren't many? Like, what was the situation?
Well, this is the thing, is I decided to dig deeper because I couldn't believe that there was this dearth of women in tech. So I actually started really kind of researching, and I found women everywhere, in every single field related to tech. But what was happening was they weren't being covered by the press. And when I dug even deeper, I found there were two reasons for that. One, women were not putting themselves forward. And even when I approached women to say, I'd like to interview you for this book, a lot of them, even though they were completely accomplished and had brilliant careers, would often say, oh, I don't think you should interview me. I'm probably not the right person, but I can recommend a colleague, or I can recommend my co-founder. So that was always really amazing to me. So I made it a mission to kind of focus on, from the very start of our business, doing these interviews with women and kind of pushing them to do it. And putting them up on our blog. And then also the empowerment fashion was really about being able to go out to places and start conversations with people. So the very first t-shirt we did, it had a swear word which I won't mention, but it said, I'm an entrepreneur, bleep. And it was taken off, Mark Zuckerberg had a business card that said, I'm CEO, bleep. And a girl in the States had basically worked for him, got these t-shirts printed up, and we imported them. And they did really well, because women would go to board meetings wearing them, and suddenly it was like, it kind of broke the ice. But this was like 4 years ago, and so now, with all that's happened politically, it's become even more important. And our message has always been the same, but it's become even more important that we're doing this. And on the flip side, we always said from the beginning that we wanted our fashion to give back, because we believe that with fashion, you can spread a message about empowerment quite far and wide, because people wear the t-shirts, they're conversation starters, people talk about empowerment. But what we were understanding very early on is that there are places we couldn't ever reach. And so what we did is we partnered with a charity.
What do you mean couldn't reach?
Well, our fashion is worldwide, it's global, okay? But there's some people in certain countries that aren't going to buy a Girl Power t-shirt, but yet we want them to feel empowered. So the message was still the same, but we couldn't reach them through fashion. So we partnered with a charity called World Reader, who give digital books and through apps as well, to countries that are in need of libraries. A lot of these countries and places that World Reader visit don't even have libraries. And so, so all of our proceeds from our Girl Power range goes to this charity.
Oh, fantastic. So you're starting to see a change?
Yeah, well, I think the fact is, what we believe in is empowering women and girls. I have a son, and I often get asked, well, what about boys? And the same thing I say to my son is what I say to others. In some places, women and girls are held back far more than boys. And I think historically that has been the case, even, in the Western world. So for us, it's about empowering girls and women to believe and know that they can do anything they want to do.
It's quite interesting you say this as a maths teacher, a female maths teacher. I've sort of worked with kind of a variety of kids, and there's a class that kind of stands out to me, what you're saying, bright, but in the class, there was always like 3 or 4 boys who always put their hands up. Yeah. And I presumed when they did the first test, they were going to smash the test and do really well. Turned out the people who smashed the test were 3 girls who didn't say a word. Yeah. It was just so interesting to think that they were like, they knew a lot, but it was kind of because they were good girls, they didn't speak. Yeah. So it's quite interesting, that whole idea.
It's the perception, isn't it? And I do find from my experience, like I was saying about interviewing women, is that they will. I interview men as well. So I write books about female and male tech founders and innovators. So I've done across the board, and I've done people like who created Siri and Shazam, and a lot of the women that I interview, it doesn't matter where they are in their careers, they will nearly always say, to start with, I don't know if you want to interview me. Wow. And they're so humbled. But I always say, if you don't have these female role models in the press, in the tech press, or even on Twitter, then kids who are looking at different industries, and especially the STEM industries, they don't see themselves. And if they can't see themselves, they can't picture themselves being there. And that's a massive problem, I think.
So it's, the issue is press, but is there anything you think schools can do to kind of improve how girls view tech and the idea of them getting involved in STEM?
Well, I'm a huge believer that role models are important. So I always think that role models should be going into schools, because teachers have a certain way of teaching things and they have a certain length of time in order to teach them. But I think if you could get children when they're young, if you get them at 6, 7, 8, and you take in a female roboticist, for instance, who goes into the school and shows off a robot, which of course the kids are going to love and think is cool, and how do you do that? And you have a woman teaching them and saying, look, I created this robot, or I programmed this robot. That has a completely different meaning to the girls, because the boys are looking, oh, fantastic, it's a robot. But the girls are saying, oh my gosh, she created that. And I think women, you know, and especially young girls, they take on board these things. And like I said, I think traditionally you're always looking at, you know, subjects a certain way, and if you don't see yourself doing that, you don't necessarily have the grit to go through when it becomes difficult. You know, maths is obviously one of those subjects. It's not as easy as other subjects.
But that's where the magic is, I suppose. It's that thing of actually the struggle's kind of the key, but then that's where the satisfaction and the real kind of reward comes. And actually a lot of girls are good at it, but it's funny, they won't say, you know, or they're not as quick to say that they are, which is just quite interesting.
I mean, I remember even in my maths class, and I was in top set everything, so I felt like everything was okay, and I wasn't really struggling with anything. However, in the maths set I was at low in the top set, and our maths teacher had this particular way of demeaning us. So I don't know if it was intentional or not, but what she did, maybe it was to inspire us, but it didn't quite have that effect. So what she would do is when she'd hand the homework back out, she would or the test results, she would hand them back in order of who got the highest mark to the lowest. And there was me and this girl, and I feel like we've gone on to be pretty successful, but we would literally be like tapping the table, waiting for like 20 minutes. There's like 26 kids, and we're like, okay, you know, in fact, why don't you do it first, because we know it's us. But it was like really kind of, it knocked our confidence, which is completely the wrong way to do things, because especially with maths, I think it's not, I say it might be a more difficult subject to others, but I think it's how people treat it.
I agree.
I think with English, if you stumble over a word, your parent, your teacher, whatever, oh, don't worry, you know, this is, and you learn it and you relearn it, and you're not thought of being stupid. It's just, whereas maths, you're right, you're wrong. If you're wrong, you're stupid. And that's the perception.
And it's wrong. This idea of right and wrong is so bad, because there's almost infinite ways of getting to the right answer, and actually the struggle is the key.
And I think, you know, we put so much pressure on teachers and schools to be like, you have to get all of this children to a certain level by a certain time. But I think there needs to be also pressure on parents, because I think confidence most of the time comes from home. And I think if a kid goes into school and they don't have the confidence that is required for learning, then it makes it so much harder for the teachers, because you have children who are already uninterested regardless of what it is. And like you said about maths, you know, there's a deep love of maths for most people if they really knew what maths was. Like if I was to say to my son, it's not just 2 + 2, it's in everything that we do all day long. He plays computer games. He would be fascinated.
Football, it's sports, it's everywhere.
Well, this is the other thing, going back to the point about talking about girls and boys, I think historically it might have been that the men, the fathers, like had the bank accounts, and you know, it wasn't that long ago that women weren't allowed bank accounts.
True, right.
So I think if you go down the line, you know, on the male side, they were more used to using maths, and so, you know, I think historically we come from that point, and I think girls and women in general are more kind of discouraged when it's a difficult problem, only because of the perception that they're not going to be as good as the boys, and actually science has proved it's not true.
That's funny, because it's about kind of sort of a shift in society, and also a narrative, because I've actually had girls say to me, oh, I'm not very good at maths, but that's okay, girls aren't. And I've lost myself in those moments of don't you ever say that, but it's something that they're hearing, you know, they're hearing from parents, they're hearing from mothers, which is so sad. So it's wonderful to hear you kind of encourage that. And also, like, what's the next step for you? Like, what is your kind of bigger goal?
Well, the thing that we find difficult at the moment is my sister and I set the company up, and my sister's background's completely in fashion, and mine was in tech. So I think when we came together, it was really trying to marry the two, and how we can use fashion for good and how we can use technology to reach more people. And so the thing that we do now is we really look, so we started off with the fashion, and the interviews kind of came secondary, but very quickly afterwards. And now we're focusing far more on the interviews. And in fact, in the next year, we're kind of slowing down with the fashion. We'll still have the girl power t-shirts, but we're kind of getting rid of the other stuff, because we want to focus on engagement and community. And for us, like, you know, I always think of storytelling like maths, because I think there is this kind of rhythm of storytelling which, again, it's something I try and say to my son all the time, that, maths is everywhere. And with storytelling, it's really key because, we have a beginning, middle and end. And we've had our beginning part of our journey in terms of this business. Mm. And to be honest, it started as a side project. We didn't think, I just had my kid, my sister come back from travelling. So I think it was very much that we were going to move on to something else. And now we know that the next thing for us is this engagement with the community. So now we're looking at a community completely differently because we never had the tools before. 10 years ago, if we tried to build this, it wouldn't have been the same. But now we have the tools to kind of see what our engagement is. And that's another great thing about maths because, you're able to teach kids, you want to do this, you want to do this, you want to do it. It's all about engagement and storytelling. Because you want your story to reach people, and the way to do it is kind of how we're doing it and checking our engagement and seeing how it works.
Oh, so big thank you to Danielle Newnham for taking the time to chat to us, and to the Albright Club in London for giving us a room to chat in. It's a beautiful place. Check out the amazing interviews with inspiring women on fequals.com, and we really recommend her book, Female Innovators at Work, Women on Top of Tech. So, Bobby.
Really inspired by her. Yeah. And I like her concept of how we need more role models in the sciences and mathematics, and particularly women. And there are some people that will be the naysayers and say, oh, we should just let talent out and whoever's the best, the best. But if we've had decades or centuries of underrepresentation because of the way society's been sort of like a patriarchal organisation where the men have the bank accounts and the men control the money and the finance, of course, women have not been brought up in society where numbers, I think it's only till recently where, was it home economics was taught
separately. So I think was it before, sort of in the 60s, 70s, that sort of, as after the war, you had school texts and secondary moderns, and I think it was you sort of did home economics as a woman, as a girl, and then you did kind of house school, like making practical stuff, and so the man of the house was a person in charge of the money and things. But that's what I think. Also, there was a narrative at the time that women couldn't. So the women weren't allowed to vote because they weren't able to manage the thought process behind voting. Yeah. And so this is unless in the last 100 years, and actually science has proven that that's not true. So this is in this new kind of realm. So it's amazing what she's doing to showcase that.
And things we really need it was, again, of course, I have to be careful not to stereotype, but again, from my class experience, I've seen that boys in all middle, high, lower attaining classes would, on average, tend to overestimate their ability to get things right. And with my girls, again, this is a stereotype, will tend to underestimate. And this leads to the issue where, in your class, you said that you had a class where the boys are always putting their hands up.
They were so confident, and I really, really believed in that class that the first test that we do, that the boys who were always talking were going to do really well. And they were, sounds awful, quite average. And there was just these 3 girls who I hardly ever heard speak at all, and they smashed the exams. And it's that thing of encouraging them. So I kind of did really push for them to speak in lessons, but that's something new to them because I think they perceive themselves as good girls, and good girls don't speak. And that's kind of the shift. I think it's that whole, intelligent girls who are good learning to have a voice. And not to say the boys that, who are active and are engaged and are being loud shouldn't be. I think it's actually good. I think it's more about meeting them or raising the discussion in the class. And I think women who are good at something should try and get better at saying they are. Yeah. But it's a newness. I think it's new for a lot of women who've got maybe a little bit of power to be like, actually, I've got something to say. Yeah. And that's what's great about F Equals. It's a really amazing platform because there's some women doing incredible stuff, as well as some men. Of course.
But you need to make sure that people are aware of it, rather than people think, oh, actually, I'm a woman, I shouldn't really speak up because I don't think I'm as qualified as my male counterparts. Actually, if you've got the qualifications and got the skills, you should be out there on a platform sharing your knowledge and ideas.
But also, and not thinking about it as an ego thing, it's kind of, you're doing a duty for the girls in schools who have the capacity and capability to do it, to do what you're doing, but don't have the vision because they don't see anyone else in their lives doing it. So it's kind of not just do it for ego, don't even do it for ego, do it for the younger people coming up. And that's kind of why the organisation that Danielle is running is so necessary.
I need to get a t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah, definitely, we all do. So now, shall we go to the puzzle?
Yes. Shall I remind you of the puzzle first?
Please, I think everyone would like a reminder.
Yes, so we've got 5 women, probably all taller than me, on a basketball team with their squad numbers on the back. The sum of all their squad numbers, which are all different positive integers or whole numbers, adds up to 50. So what is the largest individual possible squad number? So how did you get on with that puzzle this week?
Right. So again, this one, I think you are probably getting the idea that I quite like to draw a few diagrams.
Yeah, I can see it. Our listeners can't see, but I can see lots of very well-drawn pictures.
Oh, thank you. I'll be putting all of our solutions on our Instagram at Maths Appeal. So I sort of did the sum of 5 unknown numbers equals 50. I did them in little boxes, and we wanted our biggest value. So what I did was, and we couldn't have any repeats. That's what I kind of gathered. You couldn't repeat any of the numbers. So then I just thought, we'll start with the smallest number we can have. That's an integer 1. Then the next biggest number 2. The next biggest number 3. The next biggest number 4. So that's the first 4 numbers of our basketball squad. And then I added those together, found the sum of those, which came up to 10. And then I took that away from 50. So the biggest value we could possibly have is 50 take away 10, which is 40.
Perfect.
Oh.
Yeah, well done. Good.
Yeah, okay. Did you do it the exact same way?
Yeah, the same way. And with this question, you can actually toy about with the type of question. I could easily do a West Ham football team with 11 players and their squad numbers up to 100 and the what's the largest possible number. So you can have different combinations, but the same concept of trying to block it out into 2 parts. One, you've got all the smaller numbers, which you had in your 4 boxes, and then the large one. So almost like that's what you done. You isolated the box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4 from the other one, the unknown, as it were.
Right, yeah. I mean, 'cause I suppose just thinking about it as like a variety, to vary up the question, it could be all the numbers have to be even numbers, or all the numbers have to be prime numbers or something to kind of make it more complicated. Oh, I liked it because also it wasn't that difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way that obviously when you think of what to do, you're like, I did it and I thought, is that it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think people shouldn't be alarmed if they get something quickly, because in maths, sometimes people often will think, surely that's not it. But,
Today, it was it. Oh, brilliant.
So that's it from us. Thank you again for downloading this episode of Maths Appeal. Please help us in spreading the maths love by giving us a 5-star rating or just telling your friends about this podcast.
And our guest next week is Mike Ellicock, the Chief Executive of National Numeracy. When we met him, he's a really, really interesting guy. Some great facts about numeracy in our country.
Yeah, no, I'm actually an ambassador for that charity. Oh. So Mike's a good guy, and essentially their organisation was set up in 2012 to help promote and raise the low levels of numeracy we have in this country with adults and children.
It's a great charity. But before we go, it's time for us to go in a minute. Bobby, do you have any maths trivia for us?
Yes, let's find out trivia. So in my book, The Life-Changing Magic of Numbers, go buy it. Here are sort of an outtake. There's a bit of trivia that didn't quite make it. On a roulette wheel, like imagine a Monte Carlo, or in Stratford, we've got
Stratford.
Stratford. How many numbers on a roulette wheel do we have?
Is it 32? No,
it's a bit more. Next
33?
36.
36.
Yeah, 36.
36.
Yeah. So it goes from 0 to 36.
Oh, right, yeah.
And if you add up all the numbers, 0 to 36, so 1 plus 2 plus 3, plus 33, plus 34, plus 35, plus 36.
Yeah.
Guess the number we get? We get 666.
Oh, the bad number. Is that on purpose?
I don't know. That's just it's a freaky fact.
Thanks for that, Bob. Yeah. That's brilliant. So you've been listening to Maths Appeal, presented by Susan Okereke and Bobby Seagull.
And the music's by Kelly Okereke. The image design is by Calix Davis, and the producer is the fabulous Jenny Nelson.